The old rotary phone kept ringing in the Thompson house, but no one was there to answer it. June 1984, Maple Hollow, Wisconsin, and 76-year-old Walter Thompson had just vanished. His porch light was still on, his shoes by the door. The screen door swung gently in the breeze. And the only clue? A half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table, and a single muddy boot print by the back door. Before we dive deeper into this chilling story on missing shadows, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Maple Hollow, Wisconsin, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and no one locked their doors at night. A quiet Midwestern town tucked between cornfields and forests, with one main street, a single grocery store, and a local diner where the waitresses remembered your order by heart. It was the summer of 1984, when milk came in glass bottles, kids rode their bikes without helmets, and missing persons posters were still printed in black and white and pinned to bulletin boards. Walter Thompson was a retired postal worker, widowed for almost a decade. He walked with a slight limp from an old war injury and had a fondness for root beer floats and vinyl jazz records. Every morning, without fail, he fed the birds, read the newspaper, and strolled 2 blocks to the diner where he sat in the same corner booth. But when he didn't show up that Wednesday morning, his absence was noticed immediately, first by the waitress, then by his neighbor, and finally by the town's only female patrol officer, Lena Walsh. Lena, 32, was sharp, intuitive, and had joined the local police after serving in the army. She had a reputation for solving problems no one else wanted to touch, and this case would test everything she knew about instinct, memory, and small-town trust. Lena stood at Walter Thompson's front porch. The sun hadn't risen fully, and morning dew still clung to the windows. His mailbox overflowed with circulars and a postmarked letter from his son in Chicago. The porch light was still on. She knocked, no answer. When she pushed open the door, it creaked slowly, revealing a home that looked paused in time. The kitchen table had a half-eaten slice of toast. The coffee pot was cold. His walking cane, the one he never left home without, was still leaning against the wall. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No note. Lena walked through each room. The TV was off. Bedroom untouched. Bedmate. Shoes neatly placed at the door. It was as if Walter had evaporated. Back at the diner, regulars offered rumors more than facts. "I saw him Tuesday evening," said Ed, the barber, sipping his black coffee. "He mentioned something about going to the lake. You know, the one behind the old mill." "The lake?" Lena blinked. "He hasn't driven in 2 years." Shrugged. "Said he'd get a ride. Wouldn't say from who." That's when Lena remembered something. A few days prior, Walter had been chatting with a drifter outside the grocery store. A man in a denim jacket, out-of-town license plates on his beat-up station wagon. No one knew his name. No one had seen him since. The scent of boiled potatoes and lemon polish drifted from Walter's kitchen, triggering something in Lena. She stepped slowly through the living room, her eyes lingering on framed photographs lining the wall, faded moments of youth, wartime medals, and a yellowing picture of a young boy holding Walter's hand. That boy was Tommy, Walter's son. He hadn't been back in years. Lena sat on the old plaid sofa, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was a rupture, a final thread snapping in a man's lonely world. She remembered her first encounter with Walter. It was 1974, the day after her mother's funeral. Lena had wandered outside, numb and tear-stained, and Walter had been mowing his lawn next door. He shut the mower off, walked over, and sat silently beside her on the curb for 20 minutes. Not a word, just quiet presence. He did that for the next 4 days. Afterward, Walter became her constant. In a town where men disappeared into factories or bars, Walter stayed steady, offering help without asking questions. Fixing squeaky hinges, teaching her son how to fly a kite, leaving a pie on her porch after her divorce. And yet, beneath his calm surface, Lena had sensed sadness. Walter rarely talked about his wife, who had passed before Lena moved in. And as the years piled up, so did his loneliness. Last Christmas, he'd given Lena a dusty box with an old chessboard inside. No one to play with anymore, he'd said softly. Figured you might teach your grandson. That day, she'd noticed something else. His eyes. Tired, yes, but almost as if he were searching for something just beyond memory. A longing. A whisper of someone he'd once been. Now, sitting in the silence of his empty home, Lena felt it again. This wasn't just about a man gone missing. This was about a man forgotten, and someone out there knew why. Detective Ray Halbridge hadn't expected to be pulled into a missing persons case involving a man in his 80s, not in 2024, and definitely not one from 1987. He stared at the brittle file in his hand, yellowed and water-stained. Walter Lewis. Age, 84. Disappeared, August 3, 1987. Last seen, standing on the corner of Briarwood and Delaney, wearing a blue cardigan and slippers. Witness, none. The file had been buried in an old cardboard box in the county archives, untouched for nearly 4 decades. So why had someone slipped it under his office door this morning? No note. Just the file. Ray rubbed his jaw. He wasn't even born when Walter disappeared. Back in Stonefield, Lena stood on Walter's back porch, watching the wind stir the overgrown grass. The fence behind the house, once white, had collapsed years ago. But something had caught her attention. A torn fragment of paper wedged under a loose floorboard on the porch. She tugged it free. An old grocery list. Nothing special. But on the back, scribbled faintly in pencil, were the words, Delaney bus stop. 6:10 p.m. She said she'd come back. Lena froze. Meanwhile, Ray began quietly checking police records from August 1987. Nothing jumped out until he cross-referenced local bus routes and found something chilling. 2 other elderly men had vanished that summer. One in June, another just 2 weeks before Walter. Both had no family nearby. Both were last seen at or near bus stops. And both cases had been ruled as wandered off. Ray stared at the screen. 3 men. Same town. Same summer. 3 vanishings. But it was a photo from Walter's case that twisted something in Ray's gut. The crime scene tech in 1987 had captured a blurry Polaroid of the sidewalk near Delaney. In the corner of the frame, nearly missed, was the silhouette of a woman. Mid-30s. Short haircut. Holding something in her hands. Enhancing the image didn't help. But the timestamp did, 6:09 p.m. 1 minute before Walter was last seen. Ray jotted down a note. Who was the woman at Delaney stop? And why had someone pushed this file onto his desk now? He didn't know yet, but someone in this town was ready to talk, or was trying to make sure he never found out. It was nearly 8 p.m. when Ray Halbridge parked outside the Briarwood Nursing Center. The place had changed names over the decades, but the building remained the same, gray stone, wide windows, and the ever-flickering fluorescent lights at the entrance. He stepped into the main lobby and asked to see Mrs. Evelyn Hartley, one of the few surviving residents from the original 1980s directory. According to the center's records, she'd lived 2 houses down from Walter Lewis at the time of his disappearance. Inside her quiet room, Evelyn sat upright in a faded armchair, knitting with slow, trembling fingers. Ray sat across from her. Mrs. Hartley, I'm Detective Halbridge. I'm looking into an old case. A man named Walter Lewis. You knew him? Her hands paused, then resumed. Of course I did. Kind man. Lost his wife in 85. We used to play gin rummy on his back porch. Until he stopped showing up. She said it so plainly it made Ray's chest tighten. Do you remember the day he vanished? Evelyn's eyes sharpened, and she slowly pointed to a dusty photo frame on her side table. It was a group photo, neighbors on the block in the late 80s, smiling in front of someone's lawn. Walter was there, on the left. Beside him stood a woman Ray hadn't seen before. The same woman from the bus stop Polaroid. Who's that? Ray asked. Evelyn looked at the photo long and hard. That's Margaret, she said finally. Margaret Beale. She came to town in June of 87. Moved into the blue house on Delaney. Rented, I think. Said she worked nights. No one ever saw her much. But Walter, he liked her. Said she reminded him of his wife. Ray's breath caught. What happened to her? Evelyn gave a bitter smile. Disappeared. Same week Walter did. Cops said she skipped town, left dishes in the sink, mail on the table, never came back. The air turned cold in the room. Ray left with the photo in hand and a name he hadn't expected. Margaret Beale, the woman in the shadows of multiple missing persons cases. Later that night, Lena dug into an online archive of local newspapers. After an hour of sifting, she found something that stopped her cold. A wedding announcement from 1959. The photo showed a beaming young couple, Margaret Beale and Walter Lewis. Lena stared in disbelief. She didn't remind him of his wife, she whispered. She was his wife. But that was impossible. Walter's wife, Eleanor Lewis, had died in 1985. There was a headstone, an obituary. Was Margaret Beale a second wife? Or was something much stranger at play? And if she was supposed to be dead, then who had come back for Walter? The rain tapped steadily against the kitchen window as Lena paced with the old wedding clipping in her hand. The image haunted her, Walter Lewis and Margaret Beale, smiling like they had their whole lives ahead of them, in 1959. But if Margaret was Eleanor, then who was buried in the cemetery? Ray rubbed his temples as he reviewed the timeline. Walter's wife, Eleanor Lewis, died in 1985 from an illness. Funeral records confirm it. Local obituary too. Lena shot him a look. Then why is Margaret Beale, who's clearly the same woman, showing up alive 2 years later, renting a house in the same neighborhood? Ray muttered, unless Eleanor never really died. The next day, Lena and Ray drove out to Willow Grove Cemetery. It was a small, quiet plot nestled behind a church. They walked through rows of weather-worn headstones until they reached it. Lewis, 1938 to 1985. Beloved wife and soulmate. Fresh flowers sat at the base. Recent. Someone still visited. Ray turned to Lena. We need to exhume the body. Won't get a warrant, she replied. Not unless we prove the identities in question. That evening, Lena pulled out Walter's case file again. One photograph caught her eye, taken in 1976 at a 4th of July block party. Walter and Eleanor, midlife. She compared it to the Margaret Beale photo from 1987. Same cheekbones. Same smile. Same woman. The problem was, Eleanor had a birth certificate. A family. A burial. But Margaret Beale? No official records before 1987. Just a rental agreement and 2 blurry photographs. Ray met with a local historian who dug through old property ledgers. The house on Delaney? Registered under an alias. Owner never filed taxes. Used a P.O. box from another state. Lena's screen lit up again later that night. I found a hospital record, she said. Eleanor Lewis was admitted in February 1985 for terminal lymphoma. But then, she was discharged 5 days later, against medical advice. And after that, nothing. No follow-ups. No hospice. Just gone. Ray's voice dropped. So either she faked her death, or someone else was buried in her place. Lena exhaled. And if she did fake her death, why come back 2 years later with a different name? Why live 2 blocks away from her own house? The only people who might have known were either long dead, or still missing. They sat in silence. Until Lena spoke again. What if she never left? Ray looked at her. What if she's still in that town, still watching, and she's the one mailing the photos? Ray's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the leather-bound journal Lena had found buried in a false compartment behind a dresser in Margaret Beale's abandoned house. The pages were crisp, aged, written in blue ink, line after line of names, dates, places. All elderly. Walter Lewis, Harold Eastman, Lillian Crow. Every name matched an elderly missing person case from the 1970s to the early 1990s. Lena leaned over his shoulder. This isn't a scrapbook. It's a ledger. Ray nodded grimly. She was tracking them. All of them. Each entry had meticulous details. Last known location, physical conditions, relatives, even medical history. Some names were crossed out. Some had red circles. One had the words, relocated. Success. What the hell does relocated mean? Lena whispered. Ray turned to the last pages, recent, undated, but clearly written by the same hand. They've forgotten more than we'll ever understand. The government no longer listens, so I will. I bring them where no one else looks, a place of memory, not surveillance. Their minds are not lost. They're hiding. And some are protecting us all. Lena stared at the page. She wasn't abducting them. She was rescuing them. Ray blinked. From what? Lena pointed to another passage. He told me they were the last ones who remembered the experiments. The ones they let slip away. The ones they didn't want found. There was a map folded inside the journal. An area deep in the Cascade Mountains, marked with a red circle. Off-grid, inaccessible, surrounded by federal forest land, Lena muttered. No roads, no towns. Just wilderness. Ray's voice was quiet. She brought them there. But why? Lena asked. Ray closed the book slowly. Because someone didn't want them to remember. Back in town, Lena visited the Stonebrook Public Library, searching through microfilm records of town council meetings and obscure incident reports from the 1970s and 80s. One article caught her eye. Local resident claims town was test site in Cold War era. The woman in the photo? Eleanor Lewis. Margaret Beale, formerly Eleanor Lewis, says she has proof the town was part of a psychological trial. They experimented on us, she says. And they're still watching. Lena's hands shook as she printed the article. Ray met her outside. She tried to go public, she said, in 1984, a year before her death. Ray nodded, and they silenced her. No, Lena whispered. She vanished herself. To protect them. To find others. As they stared at the journal again that night, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about missing people. It was about forgotten truths. And someone, perhaps still alive, had been fighting to make sure those truths never saw the light of day. As the group entered the nursing home and made their way to room 6B, a quiet hush fell over them. Margaret was sitting in a recliner, a blanket draped over her lap, staring out the window at the setting sun. Her silver hair caught the amber glow, and in that moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Margaret, Officer Rena said gently, stepping forward. Margaret turned her head slowly, blinking in surprise. Her eyes, though aged, were still a deep, soulful blue. Yes, she whispered, almost unsure. Frank stepped closer, holding out the photograph he had carried for 4 decades, a faded image of Margaret in her 40s, smiling, holding her husband's hand. Do you remember this? He asked. Margaret took the photo with trembling hands. Her eyes widened. That's me. And Charlie, she said, tears welling up. Officer Rena knelt beside her. We've been looking for you. For over 40 years. Tears began to fall freely down Margaret's cheeks. I didn't know anyone was still looking. Frank sat beside her and gently touched her shoulder. Your story never left us. You were never forgotten. Margaret's sob turned into a soft smile. She glanced back at the photo and then looked up at the people gathered around her. Strangers, yet somehow not. I always thought, no one would ever find me. She reached for Frank's hand and squeezed it tightly. Thank you for not giving up. The news spread fast. Local stations picked up the story. Missing woman found after 42 years thanks to retired detective and community leads. The town of Brook Hollow buzzed with emotion. Some cried, some reflected, and others reached out to elderly relatives they hadn't spoken to in years. Margaret was given a warm welcome back into a world that had changed beyond recognition. The nursing home, once just a place she had faded into, was now filled with visitors, flowers, and letters from strangers moved by her story. Frank visited her every weekend. They would talk for hours about her memories, her regrets, her joys, and how she ended up in Minnesota with no ID and no one asking questions. Sometimes the world moves too fast to notice the ones who get lost, she once said softly. Rena, too, kept visiting. The case had changed her. In solving an old cold case, she found something more valuable than a headline. She found perspective. She began organizing volunteer efforts to locate other missing elderly, using a mix of old-school legwork and heart. The final piece came when Margaret's daughter, Laura, now in her 50s, walked through the doors of the nursing home. The two hadn't seen each other since 1982. Their reunion was wordless at first. Just sobs. Holding each other. Wrinkled hands wrapped around time itself. "I thought I lost you," Laura whispered. "And I thought no one would ever look," Margaret replied. Frank's journal was published posthumously 3 years later. In it he wrote, "We didn't have the internet. We didn't have GPS. But we had heart. We had maps, memories, and instincts. We found Margaret not through tech, but through humanity. The world has changed, but the heart doesn't need a signal to find what's missing." Some stories aren't about solving mysteries. They're about remembering to never stop caring. If this story gave you chills, drop a comment with your thoughts below. And if you want more real-life mysteries like this, subscribe now and check out the next video waiting for you on the screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.